I think understanding that even if you have the right skills and you have the right timing and you have the right relationships, you can still fail, I think is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. In other words, anyone's level of control isn't what they think it is.
Greetings, friends. I'm James.
And I'm Randy. You're listening to the Passionately Wrong podcast, where we challenge your assumptions, offer some different perspectives, and hopefully help you make better decisions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Passionately Wrong podcast. I'm James Bellershow, and I'm here together with my co-host, Randy Searles. And today we have the great pleasure of another interview, this time with a good friend of mine, Kostas Mallios, who has, like all of our guests, a interesting and very diverse career behind him. And although he is still at the pinnacle of that career, I think he has gathered quite some learnings along the way, which he is happy to share with us today. But before we get into the business side of things, I want to say welcome, Kostas. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, James.
Tell us where you are at the moment. Are you actually in that lovely background that is behind you? What state are you in? What city are you in?
Truth be told, I am not. This is actually a lab at Applied Materials and where I currently work. I'm sitting in Seattle in Kirkland, Washington, the home of the Costco Kirkland brand, if anyone is familiar. And that's where we are.
Cool. I have become a gigantic fan of Costco for what it's worth. And I think if the legend here is right, in Greenville, we have one of the most popular or successful Costco stores we have. And judging on how many people are in there at any time I ever go, I could believe it. Did you pick your title at Applied Materials because you've been there since 2019 and you have a title of Director and General Manager of Applied AI? And AI is a big deal now, but it wasn't in 2019. So who was it and when did you come up with the idea of saying applied AI? Because right now that looks pretty darn clever. Tell us a little bit about that, how you came there and what you're doing and how Applied Materials is involved in the whole AI boom. How are you seeing it?
Okay. So I came to Applied in 2019 with the idea of figuring out what we call the systems opportunity, particularly around AI. In other words, for AI to run, you need some pretty crazy software and you need even crazier hardware. And if you looked at NVIDIA stock lately, you can see that the hardware is actually a pretty big deal. AMD just made an announcement a couple of days ago. Their stock has been up, I think, 90% this year because of AI. So the team was named Applied AI. I named it. I was the first employee of that team. And it was all about trying to figure out what are the wafer fab equipment implications around AI. In other words, we make the tools that make the wafers that have thousands of chips on them that run AI on those chips. And so what do we have to do? What technology do we have to develop to make and enable AI to happen for the world? And so that is how Applied AI came to be.
Are you the busiest man in the world right now? And are you kicking yourself or saying, awesome, I assume business is good? Or
business is great. Our stock is up 3+X since I joined. So business is good. The COVID transition, if you will, that crazy period where there wasn't enough of anything, it was very challenging for us as it was for everybody. But I think things are being ironed out and I feel very privileged to be in Applied. I think I'm learning a ton. This has been one of those crazy turns in my career, James, where I didn't know anything about material science or devices or transistors or chips or architectures or power, area, cost, performance, time to market around chips. And I've learned a ton in the last 4 years. It's been I call it the tip of the spear.
What did you know, Kostas, that allowed you to get these guys to set up this division with you as its head? What the hell did you do? What are your skills that you brought to the table? Let's say it that way.
A really good question. I still don't know the answer to that. My first meeting was with the chief of staff on the phone, and the second meeting was with the CEO. And after about 2.5 hours or so with Gary Dickerson, a few months later, a job offer was made. Look, I have a very diverse background. As you know, I've spent 20 years or so in the Microsoft universe. I've done private equity work. I've done venture capital work. I've been in both the travel business. I've sat on the board of the largest cargo airline in the United States. It's just all over the place. And I think that provides a perspective and a point of view on what can you learn from all these diverse businesses and moving them forward, that I think in some ways it set me up well for another great unknown, which is what is the systems opportunity for applied materials. And I think bringing all that together, the importance of software in everything we do today, I think being the cornerstone, I think really allows me to operate and to do I think some of the crazy work I've done, I think it applied, but also frankly, it's the attitude that allows you to do non-traditional work in any one of these companies.
So there's two things there I'd like to explore. What you just said about the attitude, which I want to come back to, but then first, given the diverse places you've worked and the diverse experiences that you had and brought along the way or learned along the way, does it feel to you like that was some kind of plan, or did it develop organically? And it makes sense looking backwards that you could say, aha, all of these things I am able to leverage and learn from. Or did you have an idea, all right, I'm going to do this thing because it's going to give me this skill, and then I'm going to move on to another place where I can develop a new skill? So yeah, was it planned? Was it organic? How did you think about the progression of your career?
Good question. I think a lot of people ask me for career advice, and my career advice is I have no idea. I really don't
That's
know.
not advice, by the way.
That's not advice. And so I'm not able to give very much advice, because if you look at my career, although it could make sense to me because of what it taught me, for other people, it literally blows their head off. And they don't understand how you can go from selling a TTS company, a text-to-speech company, to Samsung, which is now the voice of Bixby, to then running a tourism and ferry company with actual ships from the Bahamas to Seattle. And then, going in and running an ultrasonic power transmission company for a little while, and then getting out of that because that wasn't going to go anywhere. But I think the diversity for me is who I am, which is I'm very curious. I have a lot of confidence. I believe in some of the fundamental things that I know. And I think I can bring that skill set and learn and continue to grow in areas that I really have no business being in. And so there is no career path for me. I hate to say that, but frankly, I feel so privileged that I'm not either in one industry or in one space or in one company for 25, 30 years that I've been working. James and I know this well because we started photographing rock musicians at certain points. I dragged them along to concerts. And that was one of my first jobs and loves, frankly. When I was 17, decided I wanted to go to concerts for free, and ended up doing that as a job for 6 years, working for the Albany Times Union, working for a series of European magazines, a variety of things. And we did all that through college. And that was the kind of job that I never even understood was a job. You turn it into a job so you can pay its bills, and fundamentally had the best time of my life meeting the most interesting rock musicians of the time. And so that leads me to semiconductors 3 decades later, which has no rhyme or reason except for the fact that I have a very open mind. I am very curious to learn about other businesses, and I love understanding what makes each of these businesses click and what are the things I can bring in that is a very different point of view than the people in the current jobs there. And I think if you look at the market for ideas, and if you look at the value of ideas, I think frankly, that is the most important thing you can bring. There's plenty of amazing technical people at all of these companies, including Applied, including Microsoft, including all these companies. What they lacked, frankly, is a little bit of unbridled imagination, a little bit of aspiration that goes beyond the norm. And I think beyond business as usual is where the gold is. Beyond business as usual is also where the risk is. And if you're willing to put up with the appetite and have the appetite for risk and put up with risk, it turns out having both ambition and inspiration and perhaps a different viewpoint adds a tremendous amount of value to any company.
Wow, quite a bit there. I like that description, Kostas. Thanks. And Randy, in case you're wondering, the concert photography thing is really as cool as he's making it sound. I only did it for a little over a year when we were in business school, and I appreciate very much that you allowed me to tag along on some of those. It was amazing. I still have, picture of Bono on my wall in Switzerland. And it was just, and many others, because that was something that you had the courage to pursue. It was an interest, and you found a way to make it work. And everybody was happy, right? The magazines and newspapers that were getting pictures were happy. You were happy to be doing it. You learned a lot about how to be a good photographer in different settings. So This attitude, you said before that there's a couple reasons why you think you've been successful besides the experiences that you built up. And one of them was, you said it was your basic attitude, which you've just described to us in a bunch of different ways. But I think the idea that you would try things that are unusual and out there and have a high degree of risk associated with them, of course, that means you're not going to succeed at all of them. But the ones you do succeed at are going to open up other new opportunities. Randy and I have observed before that one of the things we think contributes to a person being successful in life is exactly one of the things you mentioned, being open to opportunity. You don't know what's going to come, and your life isn't going to be predictable. So if something comes up that's cool, a certain person jumps at it and takes a chance. Another person says, and it's okay, by the way. You don't have to jump at every chance. People's lives take different paths, but that's definitely, I think, a hallmark from what you've just described and what I know of you, Kostas, that, if there's a chance you can make it work, by God, you're going to try it.
I heard something
So
the other day that I think will stick with me for the rest of my life, which is they were interviewing a bunch of people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and they were asking them how the last 10 years were compared and how do they expect the next 10 years to be. And without fail, it doesn't matter what the age group was, they all said the last 10 years were super tumultuous. They were filled with change, unexpected turns. It was hard. And then the next 10 years, their expectations is that everything was going to go really, really well because they now have their first job or they have their fourth job and they expect stability and they're married. And it turns out until their 70s, I think, which is where they sort of stop, every single decade is filled with change. And I think the old adage, change presents opportunity, I've embraced. And knowing that the next 10 years are going to be very different than the last 10. The fact that you were a GC, James, a few years ago, and are now doing a podcast.
We all find ways to make progress in life. I found a way.
It's called the growth mindset. And people have talked about this. And I think if you believe that part of the fun in life is to continue to learn, which will make you not just a better person, whatever that means, however way that's defined, but it will give you experiences that you can then, frankly, like we doing now, is like brag about. So that was fun. That was great. And you don't know which ones are going to be great.
And the point is, however, that you get to tell the story of what you did. And if you, by the way, even if someone else looks at that experience and says, that must have sucked, and maybe there were points in it that did suck, but if you have the right mindset, the right attitude, you can take even a objectively bad experience and say, no, I actually learned something from it. I got these and these benefits from it. That's what I call a resilience mindset of saying, I'm going to come out stronger of everything I do. I would have said I probably would take a different lesson than the one you did from the interview of people who said the last 10 years were tumultuous and I predict the next 10 years are going to be great and stable. And that is that people are terrible predictors of what's going to happen in their lives about a lot of things, actually. They never learn. We never learn. I don't know why we're bothering trying to give lessons on this podcast, Randy, because the evidence is people never learn. But
all three of us have lived, we're all products of we lived in the 90s and whole GWAT and 2000s, and then the aftermath of that. And now we're going through the COVID thing. I think we've seen all that change. And it's crazy when I think about what I was interested in. When did you start working with Microsoft?
In 1996,
So I was in the military in 1987 and you couldn't find a computer. There may be one computer at the highest level or something, or the president had a computer. I don't know. But then every year you saw more and more of the desktops. And then finally, probably mid 90s or early 90s, we started getting laptops, one or two for our Green Beret team or something. And in the beginning, we were all messing with how are we going to do our word processing? You got Word Perfect and you got Microsoft Word and you got like all these other kind of straps. And then all of a sudden one day, I don't know if you were around at this time or it happened before you got there, all Army is going to use Microsoft products. If you got any spreadsheet or any word processing document that doesn't use it, you better transfer it or retype it because we're not using anything else. And then it was from there. It was the smartest thing they ever did. I don't know if Microsoft was the one they should have bought, but it put everyone on the same sheet of music. And it was an amazing deal, I'm sure, for Microsoft. And Bill Gates got really rich off the government stuff. But I don't know if you have
the largest account for Microsoft, little known fact, of any organization, any company worldwide was the U.S. Navy. I think might still be the U.S. Navy. And so if you think about everything that can be digitized has been or is being digitized, everything that has been digitized will now have AI on it. because of all the things that AI can do. You realize that the future is bits and bytes. It's chips, it's software, it's cloud services, it's everything that we've been trying to get to, except we're getting there now in a hurry. And in some ways, some concerns, in some ways, a lot of opportunity as well. I was listening to somebody the other day talk to me about these crank calls that we get on phones. This is where technology is going. It went from a desktop on every desk or a computer on every desk, which was Bill's vision, to now they're crank calling people, trying to get their imprint of their voice so they can then use AI and extrapolate it out and use it for entering bank voice signatures to get into the bank accounts or to leave ransom notes to grandma asking for money or whatever the case might be. There's two sides to technology always, because people are two-sided. There's the good and the bad.
I was there. So the two-sidedness is, this is the way I work. James is more logical and I go off on these tangents, but my wife's downstairs watching a new movie with Julia Roberts and Ethan Hawke that was executively produced by the Obamas. And it's like a crime horror thing. And Ethan Hawke plays this trusting guy, like two people walk in the middle of the night and he's, oh, it's dark outside. There's a blackout. We should let him stay here. And his wife is super suspicious. I don't know those people. They could endanger my kids. And my wife's, oh my God, I'm really scared now because this is us. And this is exactly how you would act in this situation. It's really scary. And I don't trust you anymore. I'm like, I'm a killer, babe. I could adapt. But yeah, the two-sidedness is exactly right. And there's so many, God, I feel like I'm getting scammed every day. It's crazy. When I moved to Spain, I almost got scammed in the house I was going to rent. I almost sent a check out, or I almost transferred some money. And then I went, wait a second. And then I asked for some valid verification and they turned it around. It's like, how do I know you're not a scammer? It's like, you're not sending me any money, you scammer. And then I stopped talking to those people. We got a nice house and I didn't lose any money, but I get so many weird calls and then no one answers. I was like, what's going on? And my friend, he just did a course. He's launching it next month in January for like over 70 cybersecurity, like people who can't conceive of what's going on because they're not paying attention. They're too old to learn the tech and they're just their phone that their sons or daughters or grandchildren bought them. And just making sure, hey, don't trust anyone. Don't give your information out. If you don't know them, probably better to hang up and have your son call them or something like that. But it's just like a 3-hour, $40 course that he's pitching out there. Just that he's probably trying to make money, obviously. But I think it's like super important that that generation understands what they're going to lose.
Yeah, for sure.
What you guys are discussing is not a function of technology, although technology has a big impact on how sophisticated scams can become. What you're discussing is a facet of human nature. As long as we've had people who were, we can argue about to what extent they were good-natured and good, but there's always been a certain number who were willing to take advantage of the others in whatever manner that they could. And what's the right response, Randy? Is it to become inherently skeptical about all people? Is it to be trustful, but then have backups in place? It's a question we're all dealing with because we've all been scammed or know people who've been scammed. You're laughing.
I'm laughing because of this in the stupid movie. It's not a bad movie, but when someone knocks at the door, they're in Airbnb. Someone knocks at the door, and they're like, she's grab a bat. And he's like, why would I have a bat? But maybe that's the answer. Do you trust but carry a bat?
If you need a bat, you're in a bad situation already.
Now, this is making me feel bad because for decades, my wife has kept a bat in the corner of the bedroom and for exactly this reason. Now that I've moved to the South, I'm exploring other options.
Flamethrowers.
Oh, there's a lot, Kostas. So you said something when you were describing some of the reasons why you think you've been successful. The confidence in yourself is a big one. And I would say your confidence is well-founded. It's not because of all of what you've done and where you've been. Where does it come from? Did you have it always? Did you build it on the back of success? Was it just belief in yourself that you manifested by just doing stuff? Or did your mom support you and tell you were great and build it in you? There's lots of different ways it could have come. And I'm curious what you think. Where do you attribute it to?
You just took me back to the Salish Lodge in Seattle. And there was an event called the Strategy Conference. And the Strategy Conference were all the up and coming executives, young executives for Microsoft, and Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer would show up there for 3 days. and you would go through this unbelievable development and assessment thing. The question and the challenge was, what do you think we were missing at the company and what should we do about it? And I said to Steve Ballmer specifically, who I worked with a lot, I said, I think we need to institute the immigrant mindset. And he said, what is that? And this is in front of 25 people. And I said, you need to institute the immigrant mindset because what we are becoming is a series of mortgage payers, meaning we're taking a lot less risk. We're not out there taking the kind of swings that we should be taking in the market. And what we need to do is have more people that take calculated risk, but are not risk averse so that you can build your next $1 billion business. Because inherent in a lot of these new businesses is actually risk. No business that I know of today ever started at $1 billion. It all started as a tiny little scrappy little product that just took off, that fulfilled the need, but the timing was correct, the market dynamics were correct, and so forth. And so to answer your question more directly is, I think my confidence was built growing up in a restaurant where there wasn't a big safety net, if any. We literally would have our electricity shut off some months because we couldn't make the power payment, the electricity company payment. True story in Cohoes, New York, where you know the area. And I think recognizing how fragile everything is, you become less married to a particular outcome. You become less, because you just get scrappier. And I think by doing these things, you build confidence that you can actually pull things off. And that's where I think it came from. I used to say to my mother that everyone with $1 can come in and buy a slice of pizza and make my life miserable. And she used to laugh and say, but that dollar pays for your gas in your car. And that was always her explanation for every hardship that you would have to face running a small business. And I think running a small business and dealing with the public and the fickleness of the public, and then still being able to come back at it week after week, year after year, that restaurant, I think, is still in business, and it was started in 1982. It's 2023. And you realize that, one, you have more power than you think you have. You have to get better at taking your confidence and the power you have and giving it to others, sharing it with others, or keeping it for yourself. And I think recognizing that you have agency, you have decision making, you can make choices, and feeling confident in those choices, in other words, feeling confident in yourself, gives you the ability to have wings about the decisions you can make and the consequences you're willing to endure if it doesn't go well. And that's where I think the confidence came from. Starting at 17 years old and trying to get into the music business so I can get photo passes for concerts, dialing for dollars with a New York City phone book and an LA phone book at the basement of my house, pre-internet, I think teaches you about not just a numbers game, which sort of is true, but not really, but it teaches you about the real life risk of understanding sort of timing, skill, and maybe relationships, and bringing all that together. I think understanding that even if you have the right skills and you have the right timing and you have the right relationships, you can still fail, I think is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. In other words, anyone's level of control isn't what they think it is, both in a good way and a bad way. In other words, people have a lot more control than they give themselves credit for. And yet people need to realize that control is something that we just don't have. There are too many factors that influence the outcomes, which is why you'll meet a multimillionaire and you'll look at that person and say, that guy's a multimillionaire, or that lady has made so much money. And you think there's nothing special about them. And it turns out there isn't. They were at the right place at the right time, knew the right people, made the right decisions, and things worked out. And in other cases, doesn't work out. And being conscientious of those odds, I think, is what gives you confidence, because you realize nothing is for sure. And the outcomes can really, truly vary experience to experience, which is why it's so hard to give career advice to people, because it assumes that things are static, and things aren't anything but static. They're completely multi-dynamic at all times.
So this is a tough message for people to hear on several levels, Kostas. I agree with your analysis, and I think there's some really good points to tease out there. I like the discussion about a person having more agency than they realize, and good things come when a person exercises that agency to say, I will be responsible for what I do. I will be responsible for the consequences that come from it. That's usually where the discussion stops when people talk about that. But you added another element, which is, you know what, you're going to fail. And that failure is going to be great because it teaches you yet another really important thing, which is lots of things are not in your control. This person was successful and you were not, and it wasn't your fault. Most people are so afraid of the worry that the failure that occurs, that inevitably occurs, is going to say something about them. They don't take the chance. But in fact, you've freed yourself of feeling responsible for your agency having caused the failure because you could do everything right and still fail. And that's really a step that I think most people, I've never heard anyone articulate it quite like that, but it's a really good point. I like it. No, you are, you can control a lot, but you can't control the outcome. And
Yeah.
also, yeah, so that's quite interesting. Randy?
Yeah. So a lot of this resonates with me. I thought that I've been, I started three businesses. And I think one of the things that I would like to hear your take on it is all you said kind of resonates with me with my two failed businesses that I tried to start because I really created them. I did it. Had a business. I was in the army. So had a paycheck and I was like, I need more money. So I started these on the side. And I think it's a good idea. So I started like a takeout taxi in the 90s before GPS, cell phones. It totally didn't work. But I ran with it, broke even after 2 or 3 years. And I was just like, this isn't going to work. And then as soon as I shut it down, like 2 years later, GPS, cell phones, it's all up. Everything's working. But I wasn't really passionate about it. I was just doing it. I was like, I'm gonna hammer through it for 2 or 3 years, and then maybe I'll make some money and it'll get bigger. Never did. Then I did another one, and same thing. And I wasn't really passionate about that either. But my new business, which I edit and ghostwrite for a living now, that I run, I'm really passionate about it, and it ended up paying me back more than anything else ever did. But I am passionate about it, and I love it. And I think that's also, I'd like to hear you. You sounds like you've done a bazillion different things, and some of them didn't work, and some did work. And in my opinion, there's a center point, which is you brought in luck, right place, right time, your passion for the project. And I think all that coming together is what makes something successful for the most part.
Yeah. There's a piece in there that is beyond confidence, and I'll call that courage. I think they say success is a combination of luck and preparation, right? Or something like that. I think you have to be bold. You have to just, when you see an opportunity, you have to actually take it. Because if you don't try at the moment, it just literally passes by. The timing component here cannot be underestimated. And timing changes all the time. And I think when I think about what are the necessary conditions for success, it's all that. It really is all that. And I would say it's simplicity. People try to over-architect to reduce risk. They try to make it so complicated that it's hard to understand what you're even doing anymore. And so the concept of a minimum viable product or a simple value proposition or a way to buy something really simply for someone, like those concepts, I think are so important to really getting to the crux of what any business can be. And I think that you got to keep it simple so that you have a chance, but you got to do it all almost at the same time. One of the things, and you've both spent time in Europe, I often contrast the ecosystems and for entrepreneurial success in Europe and say Silicon Valley, for example, and they all want to be the next Silicon Valley. One of the things in Europe is there's an aversion to risk. That is one of the fundamental things. Failure is not celebrated as a cultural norm. Failure is a shameful thing to have happen. But what they don't realize is in the US, all they hear about is all the successes. They don't hear about the 90% of the startups that just fail, go belly up, bust. They sometimes hear about the serial entrepreneurs that come back over and over until they get it right. And so you have to have the right conditions to be able to take risks and to not just get rewarded for the success, but sometimes even get celebrated for the failure. One of the companies I went to, I left after about 10 months and I felt pretty good about leaving, actually. I felt great about it. I saw it, I evaluated it. I looked into the customer scenarios. I raised money. I tripled the valuation of the company while I was there. And then at the same time, I realized this isn't going to go. So cut your losses. Don't sit there and pretend it's going to keep going. I think optimism is another component, which is, I think you have to be optimistic, but at the same time, you have to look at the facts because optimism can really lead you astray. So I think it's a combination of those things. And I think this is where the classic question becomes is, are entrepreneurs born or can they be trained? Is gut instinct something that people have and become great entrepreneurs? Or does that instinct, is that something that can be trained in business school? Can it be trained in undergrad? Can you learn it by hanging out with the right people? I think the latter is probable. I think that you can learn it by hanging out with the right people. Can you really learn this from a book? I don't think so. I think you're either somewhat bred into it and can tolerate the risk and persevere and have the kind of stubbornness, if you will, in something you believe in, or not. This is what I truly believe. And I think the rest of the people, quite frankly, I think they fake it.
So I like the expression, Kostas, beyond confidence is courage. It's not just a matter of being confident. It's not just a matter of luck. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. It does also remind me of what Napoleon supposedly said when confronted with the fact that chance plays a role in every battle. He says, yeah, but I prefer my generals to be lucky, or whatever it was. You probably know it better. Some people are lucky.
Better be lucky than good.
It might just be a combination of taking a chance, right? Being confident and taking a chance when it's appropriate, not reckless, right? Or maybe even sometimes reckless, and luck is on your side. So that's an interesting element to bring in. So much here. I will say you're demonstrating a wide range of skills, but one profession I'm guessing you would not be suited for against all appearances is politics, by virtue of you having said it's okay to be optimistic, but you have to look at the facts. That's something that wouldn't fly at all anywhere, because facts is the last thing I think most of our politicians wish to see a robust discussion of. Just that's a depressing element. We don't have to get sidetracked by it, but so something you said.
Politics is a depressing element right now.
It is. It really is. And it's our fault because, at least in the countries that we're familiar with, you've spent some time in some other ones. Randy also spent time as a kid in Iran and spent a lot of his military career in other Middle Eastern countries and other places around the world where things maybe aren't going so hot. And maybe you would have a take on that, Randy. Is our politics any better than anywhere else? Am I fooling myself when I say we have a representative democracy and it's our fault if we have politicians who don't do what we think makes sense? I'll just open that question up to you. I'm curious what you would say to it.
I think it's all messed up. I mean, everyone's sliding deals. The deals aren't always the best thing for the people. They're the best thing to keep that person in power who thinks if he stays in power, he can do good by the people, but he's done all these deals. I spent 15, 20 years in South America, and like every country in South America, and most of those things are all drug deals, sometimes literally done behind the scenes. In the Middle East, most of those aren't even democracies. When we tried to do that in Afghanistan and Iraq, we failed miserably because there's different religious cultures that are involved, and it's almost impossible to get past the history in a lot of those places. Europe is looking more and more like the United States, in my opinion. I'm in Spain, and they just had another drug deal behind the scene in the open. Actually, it was in the open, and then they're doing riots in the streets saying that the people don't want this, but the politicians doing it. So I think it's all, I don't know. I think the spotlight is on America because of our journalists and the press and everything. We have even though there's a lot of stuff that's getting hidden on social media and stuff, the press has no problem reporting everything, whether you can believe it or not. And everyone in the world knows our stuff, whatever they show. I don't know how much time you spend overseas, Kostas, but it seems like in Europe, we're always getting half the story. In the United States, I have to explain the politics to my wife, because she's like, one vote doesn't, everyone doesn't vote. It's like, well, no, everyone votes. What's this electoral college? And I was like, well, and then she's like, I don't get it. I thought you guys are the birth of democracy. And I was like, yeah. So I have to explain stuff to them. And also, hey, just because this happened doesn't mean there's not, you usually have to wait two or 3 weeks to find out what might be the rest of the story or might not be. And if you react to the first thing you hear, it's not going to be the whole story. That's been my experience.
And I think, Randy, I think you just capped it. I think don't underestimate the power of a good story. And the problem is people don't want to hear bad stories. They just want to hear the good news. And politicians are just reacting to the people wanting just the good news. And so they tell them these stories and they want to believe, but they don't hold water after a while. And so everyone is in this grand illusion, not to mention religion, into this concept. That's a multi-year podcast. But I think the storytelling is important. It's important for startups. It's important for large corporations. It's important in politics, and people that aren't that interested in the truth because it's just not as enticing. Right? We're all a bunch of addicts. We want good news and short term.
I have
Dopamine,
noticed.
if it's in Facebook or TikTok, dopamine works.
Yeah, I've been writing and engaging with the public pretty actively now for 2.5 years through blogs and other public writing. And when I get comments and interact directly with readers, I observe this really directly. People live in a world of wishful thinking. They really, really, really don't mind a bit if you tell them untrue things, but pleasant things that they wish to hear. So they want to hear that everything's going to be all right. And I understand. I wouldn't make a good politician either, Kostas, because I can't help but want to look at the facts and say that doesn't actually work. So you can't eat at a fast food restaurant every day and not expect there to be some consequences. It just doesn't work. Or
My favorite this week was I think it was the Emir of Dubai or somebody that's hosting the COP28 climate talks. He said there's no science around climate change or something like that. So you have the hypocrisy around the story is getting so unbelievably blatant that it's gaslighting central everywhere, whether you're in the Middle East, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in the US. It's unbelievable.
there is a point, though, that you can take it too far, right? And people will become cynical. So at the one hand, you're totally right. Stories drive everything, and it can be used for good. When you're doing a company and you wish to get your message out, you do need to be optimistic. By the way, countries run on optimism too. If your leader is a great optimist, it can make you feel good. And actually, then stuff happens that wouldn't otherwise happen. But when people see that you are behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz and there's nothing substantive there, they get quite cynical about their institutions. Trust in institutions in the US is lower than it's ever been across the board. Military, courts, police, the people that we used to trust, we trust far less than we used to. And it's a consequence of taking this desire for happy stories too far and of saying, I'm going to tell you the border's closed, or we're not spending money more than we have, or whatever the issue is, where people can say, actually, I can see it. What are you saying? And even though I like the happy story, at some point, facts do include. So I suspect you've probably covered it, Kostas, but I'd like to come back to something you said quite early on describing success factors. You said something that I found intriguing. You said, I believe in some fundamental things. And without too much thought, I'd like you to tell me what comes to mind when you say, all right, here's the fundamental things that I believe in. I suspect you probably touched on them in your other answers, but what would be your 3 or 5 things that fall in the fundamental list?
So the thing I'm learning increasingly is know yourself. Really, truly take the time to know who you are, to know what your guardrails are, to understand what principle will take you how far, whether it's money, whether it's integrity, whether it's, you list the value. And I think that is the biggest thing, because that I think will drive a lot of the decisions that you make and the choices you will make in your life. Is if you truly understand yourself, then you could really make the right decisions. Because on the flip side of that, regret, I think, is probably the worst part. You make the wrong decisions for the wrong reasons. And then 5 years later, you have regret about the 5 years you just spent doing whatever it is you did that you never really wanted to do after. So I think that's the one thing. I think in my case, I believe in being bold. I believe in just, if you've done your homework and it feels right, jump on something. Because again, there's no guarantee of success. You can't really predict the outcomes. I think people that say that lie. You can identify patterns and you can get to things. But really, I think being bold and having confidence in yourself is a big one. And the thing that to me makes the most sense is if I have a vision about something, if I can see it, then I know how to go figure out how to make it happen. If I can't see it, I have no idea what to do. So you can't translate desire into action, into success, at least for me, if I can't see it, if I don't have a vision, if I can't tell myself an honest story that, hey, I could figure this out because of X, Y, Z, I think that's important. And I think the big one for me always is have trusted people you can talk to that you can bring in alternate viewpoints, because they will give you the red team effect, if you will. If you're making a big decision and you're not quite sure of the consequences, or you're not willing to endure the consequences, get other people's point of view, people you trust, people that have your best interest in mind.
Okay, I'm glad I asked because your answer to what are the fundamental things, you started with knowing yourself and your personal values. So that's the fundamental thing and the understanding of what are your fundamental values. And I had picked up on that the first time you described it. And also seeing your a path to not even seeing the path, but seeing what that future state might be helps you feel like you'll be able to figure out a path, even though it might not be clear. You say, all right, I see that state, I see that end state. Maybe that's part of the unbridled imagination you tried to get Microsoft to unleash. And it's your fault, by the way, that now we have Microsoft investing in OpenAI. I see that now.
Sorry. Coco agrees with
What's that?
Coach.
So we've been pretty good about avoiding too many acronyms or terms of art as a general rule. You have used a couple times, Randy, and you used it today, GWAT, which I don't know has broad applicability outside of the military. That's the Global War on Terror, I guess, based on context. But okay. And you just used red team, Kostas, which even I'm not 100% sure I'm familiar with. So what do you mean with a red team? These are people who are your sounding board or are supposed to provide critical input or?
Yeah, a red team concept is where you have an idea or a value proposition or a strategy, and you bring in three, four, five people, and they basically just hack it apart. They give you all the reasons why it can't happen and ask you to defend. So in many ways, it's trusted experts. Experts are dangerous, by the way. So you have to have the right balance of people because you can knock anything off in 2 seconds. You can come up with a million reasons why nothing will happen. But you bring in this red team, and this red team helps you think through the obstacles, helps you walk through the roadmap of how do you get there, identifies the weaknesses in your strategy, and frankly helps you make it more durable.
That's really interesting because Red Cell in the military, also a book by Dick Marchenko, a SEAL Team 6 guy. They would get the SEAL teams to do security checks on bases and federal buildings and embassies and things like that. And they would act like the bad guys. If I was a bad guy, how would I take this embassy down? And then they would provide the reports to the security guys in the embassy and say, these are your weaknesses. This is how we would do it. And then they would fix them. And so we have the same kind of terms we use in the military.
Yeah. It's like a red hat, a black hat, white hat in cyber, for example. You have a bunch of white hats that go out there and actually break your system. They'll break in to tell you how it can be done so you can fortify.
I was also going to add that as far as I'm concerned, this is the perfect job description for me, this red team thing, because that's what I did for most of my professional career. Corporate lawyers are genius at figuring out risks. And if we're good, then also helping work through mitigating and solving the problem. But if you ask me to point out 1,000 ways an idea is not going to work, Kostas, I'm your man.
You're the man. This is what we always say in technology. You want the CEO to be a technologist. Once the CFO becomes the CEO, then you have a problem. But if you have the GC becoming the CEO, then your company is basically bankrupt. You're done.
I hate to say it, but I've observed that as well. It is so bad. It is so bad. It's very rare, right? The things that makes you successful as a GC are not the same ones that make a CEO successful. Sorry. You can have an awesome, super good general counsel, but by God, the risk-taking boldness is not of the kind that you probably need. It's a bummer.
And that's why you have a team. A team
Yes.
is what's valuable. You have a great GC, you have a great CEO, a great CFO, COO, CMO. They all have a role to play in the success of an organization. And
I'm
everyone
Charlie
their
Munger
role.
to Warren Buffett. So
You also used the tip of the spear at the beginning conversation. We were talking about the AI. I always thought that was just a military term. And usually it meant you were like the lead assault of the invasion of Afghanistan or the parachute assault of Panama or something. And they actually give badges. They leave little spearheads. If you're on the spearhead for the mission, you get a little spearhead with a little star on it and stuff.
actually, Kostas, this is something business world could learn from the military, right? They are so big on their badges and their medals and their awards. And what do we get in business, right? You get a lucite cube, maybe if you're lucky. There's just not.
You get a bonus.
Well, okay, the money's not big. You're right. But
Personally, you can think on it.
But Randy, not always, right? Not always. So in a lot of companies, there is a tradition of lucite cubes. And some people, for example, with 100 patents will literally, I've seen this at Microsoft, will cover their window with lucite cubes because they have that many patents. But in other corporations, you actually get nothing.
I don't know what that is. I don't know what you're talking about.
it's like a deal toy, or it's a piece of plastic, a clear plastic in which you can put anything, like an object or a prospectus cover. I used
Yeah,
to see it for IPO work. You do it, bring a company public, and then you get a deal toy, just a little piece of
that's right.
plastic. And so people would absolutely be able to tell going into someone's office, is this person a shaker and a mover because they got a wall full of deal toys or not? And I guess a wall of patents does the same thing. So it's just
Yeah.
it's the equivalent of a soldier who shows up with all sorts of tabs and badges, medals.
Bragging rights, bragging rights.
So
And I think one of the critical things is at the end, you have to be happy with the life you've led, right? If you've done all these things, and this is the regret part, you don't want to be done and look back and say, boy, I wasted 10 years there. I should have done that. I should have done this. You don't want to have that. And so you want to be conscious and intentional walking through your career because you don't want to have those regrets.
I don't have regrets except for the fact that I carted around way too many deal toys and bound volumes with me. After I left private practice, I took all those with me to the company I worked for. And for a long time, I left them on my bookshelf because look at this, I got a whole wall full of
Yeah,
deal.
but they were highly efficient intimidation tactics. And so when another attorney from another firm would walk in to negotiate, they would look at that and go, oh man, this is going to be a tough one. This guy's been around. And so it worked.
It was fit for purpose at that time. But what happened when I left was I got a big old dumpster and I put them all in. I was like, that's it. I don't need these anymore. They don't say anything about me outside of that context. It's interesting, this little sidebar.
the interesting thing about the badges in the military is you can have too many too soon, and it shows the different side of you. Because if you're spending all your time going to these schools, these long 2 month, 4 month schools or whatever, you're not in combat. And there's combat badges that show you every time you go to 6 months into a combat zone, you get a stripe. So you can see how much combat this guy adds. And he may not have any cool badges like being on scuba school or parachute school or whatever. And then you have the guy that has every badge in the world that has maybe 2 combat stripes, and he's got the same amount of time in, but he never went to combat because he was always chasing the trainee instead. So you have this balance. You have the guys that are balanced that you're like, okay, that's the right balance. And then you have the guys that went to combat all the time, either because that they like to do that or because the timing wasn't right to go to the schools. And then you have these people that are just stacked with every badge known to man, and they walk around, they're very proud of their accomplishment, but just like, but what are you doing with all that training? Because you never work. So it's a balance in the Army. And also if you get in too soon, like you got 5 years in and you got 20 badges, what did you do the whole time? Did you actually do any work at all?
So one of the things that I have observed when I spent a lot of time with you when we were in school together, Kostas, but also since then on our encounters, is you have, to my experience, an unprecedented facility for talking with people, in the sense of, doesn't matter if they're the CEO of Microsoft or the person who is washing your car window, you will talk to them in roughly the same manner, and you will find something engaging and interesting with each of them, every single person I've ever seen you talk with. And I admire it because I think it's a rare skill. Is that something you cultivated? Is it part of the skill set you learned in wanting to do so many different things and having a vision, but not knowing how to get there and just needing to talk to a lot of people? First of all, am I overselling it? Do you see yourself in a similar way? I think it's a remarkable facility that you have, and I'm curious how you view it yourself.
Very, very interesting point. I think it started off by people telling me that people do business with whom they like. Second piece is you need to go through a person to get a decision made. When I say through a person, like you have to engage the person. That person is who's going to make the decision to either refer you, to make a decision, to help you, to not help you. And so it's a very, very important skill is to have rapport in any situation. And in order to have rapport, you have to be interesting. And so the question is, what is the story you can tell in a quiet way that will make you interesting? And to Randy's point, you can use badges and awards and medals. That's a great way to start a story. In other ways, you can actually sort of focus on your audience. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to quickly assess what that person might be interested in. I remember I met with the deputy prime minister of Turkey right after President Biden was in there. And I walked into the room and it was just he and I. And Biden was on his way out and he was vice president. And the first thing I noticed is he had the exact same watch on I had, which was, James, you might remember, it was a white Rolex Explorer 2. His name was Baba John. And I said, you and I have the same exact watch. What else do we have in common? I didn't start in with the agenda. I did start in with what I wanted to talk to him about, business. I try to bond with him on a person to person level. And this continues to this day. I can give you tons of examples, but I think if you don't know how to connect with someone, you can't have a real conversation and they won't be willing to try to go out of their way to help you. A rock star connects with her audience. If I were to put, I don't know, the woman of the hour, Taylor Swift, if I were to put her on stage with no one in the audience, I will bet you her performance would be abysmal because people get energy. I get energy from watching the reactions from people I'm talking to gauge the level of interest, if I'm hitting or if I'm missing. And if they're interested and engaged in the conversation. And I think a rock star does the exact same thing. If they can't connect with their audience, the whole show just goes blah. And I think it's a critical skill to have. I'm glad I have it. It doesn't come without risk because you can bond with somebody very quickly. The really great business people, and you name the just accomplished people in general, know this. So you have to be even better because now they think you're working them. And so it's a multifaceted assessment, and you have to do it with speed and natural and grace. And you have to be honest in the end, because if you're actually a fraud in trying to connect with them and you can't really connect with them, it will completely backfire. They will just measure you even faster. So it's really an art, just like life is. Life is an art. Life is not a science. If you want the step by step, good luck.
That's where I'm seeing some common threads here, Kostas. I think the same courage and boldness that you were discussing before also applies in this area, because especially like you say, with people who are naturally suspicious and they're being sold all the time, I've seen you do this actually. Double down. Someone's showing resistance and is pushing back. You just go for it, and you will not give up until you see if it's at all possible to establish a rapport. And I don't mean in a bad way, I mean in a good way. But that's the boldness that I think I heard you describe before, the courage. Really good points and worth repeating just for summary. I like it. People do business with people they like. It's people who make decisions. Therefore, you need to develop a rapport. To develop a rapport requires you to be interesting. And I love the last point, which is if you want to find out what's interesting, I want to be interesting to someone else. I have to find out what they're interested in. So you appeal to their self-interest, not something interesting about you. And that's where that last step I said, where I think people will go wrong quite often, right? They want to talk about themselves when actually they should be talking about the other person. What's the thing that the other person cares about?
It's very rare that someone is really, truly interested in you. They just want to tell you about them. And you have to make that a natural exchange of both listening, actively listening, asking the questions that will get them to open up even more. And it feels, as I'm even describing this to you, it feels like you're manipulating people, but you're really not. You're just simply appealing to their human nature so that you can build trust, so that then they'll say, enough about me, let's talk about you. This happened in a meeting I very recently. I spent 2 hours and this person went off on a tangent, somebody I was trying to build a relationship with. And the person that had set up the meeting said, should I cancel the meeting? Should we stop? And I said, don't you dare stop the meeting. Like on the side, I think the person went to the bathroom. And that meeting ended up being the best meeting I've had with that person. And it's just growing and growing. And it's because I gave them space to truly express what they wanted to say, really. And I encouraged them and let them know that it's safe for them to tell me what they really think. And I didn't react to that, even if I disagreed. I simply listened. And then all of a sudden, the person literally turned to me and said, okay, what do you want to talk about? Because they had just burned 2 hours through dinner saying this. But we got to what I wanted to talk about. And now we have literally a friendship that is, hopefully going to be very, very fruitful in the business sense. But you have to be human before you can do anything else. You have to be understood and you have to understand.
I do believe there's a great desire for people to be heard. And when they see that someone's listening to them, it's pretty cool. Active listening is, I find, widely misunderstood. It came out of psychology and was somewhat clumsily adapted to the business environment. And we can describe what we think it means, but to see people actually doing it is so rare. Maybe because we're all in such a hurry and there's so many competing demands for our time. To let someone ramble on for 2 hours on a off-topic discussion reminds me of some of your stories, Randy. And I don't mind them at all, by the way. They're hilarious and they're good, and they almost always do eventually teach us something that we need to know. So, Kostas, we've been talking about various success factors and elements that shape how you think about life and business and interacting with people. I'm curious if we can switch gears for a moment to talk about mistakes that you've seen either yourself make or other people make. One of the topics, the themes of our podcast is how to help avoid being passionately wrong about something. Everybody gets excited about issues, and sometimes we get super excited about something only to find out that we were, if we're lucky, to find out that we were dreadfully wrong. And so,
Mm.
one of the things we like to do, if we can, is to help give people tips about how to be wrong less often. So, can you give us some insights into what you've learned here or what you've observed?
Yeah. One of the things I would say is slow down. People slow down and check in as you're building your story, as you're building the conversation. Check in to make sure it's resonating. And if you don't know how to do that, just stop and pause. Like I have this rule: never talk for more than 2 minutes at a time. And if you talk for more than 2 minutes at a time, I can guarantee you no one's listening. And so I think that's number one, is slow down and check in with your audience. Number two, if you're wrong, immediately cop to it. Just admit it, put it out there, and be done and move on. Because I think people also know a lot of times, unfortunately, people are too polite and they don't provide enough feedback because they just want to get through it. And what you want to do is you want to give them an opportunity to check you. And I say this in conversations all the time. I say, check me on this. Is this correct? Do you see it the same way? I literally ask them for their opinion as I'm building something. And I think that's important to me. The other thing is just admit that you don't know everything. Disarm people by saying, look, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I used to walk into really important meetings at Microsoft, and I used to start by saying, I'm as technical as your shoe. Now explain this to me like a 4-year-old. And I used to work in Bill Gates' one at the time. And they're like, you're a general manager, you're technical. You work for the founder of the company. How could you not be technical? And the answer was, of course I cannot be technical because I bring other things to the table that others don't have. But I immediately have to go and disarm by being honest and saying what I know and what I don't know. And that gives you a lot of credibility with people. Because what you want to do in the end is you want to build trust. If you don't have trust, you've got nothing. And you earn the trust. You don't just ask for it. You don't walk in with your stripes and say, I'm trustworthy. You have to build and own the trust with the people you're with practically every time. And I think being vulnerable about where you are and what you know up front just gives you so much credibility. And being honest, people can smell BS a mile away. I have a thing that I say to people is nobody misses a thing. If you think you're pulling the wool over people's eyes, you're not. The most unsophisticated, seemingly unsophisticated people actually really don't miss much. And so don't assume that you're the smartest person because you're definitely not.
People are super perceptive. I would summarize that advice. I like it. Be wrong less often by being wrong more often. By admitting that you don't know something, by admitting when you've made a mistake, by being transparent and honest, right? All of those things make you vulnerable, make it seem like you're not the expert. But guess what? Helps you avoid making really big mistakes, doesn't it?
Yeah. And just spend the time to know what you know and what you don't know. You can wing things a lot. I wing things a lot, but I also will put in a whole bunch of qualifiers to let people understand. And I'll say, I'm just making this up. Check me on this. And I'll give them a scenario and see if it resonates. That's how I also get their contribution to the conversation, but also I get to learn. And every conversation is a learning opportunity. And if you get invited back, you've been successful.
There's a lot about your approach that is non-standard, I would say, at least in terms of the types of advice that people hear. So just being novel in a way helps catch people's attention. Say, look, I'm not going to be like every other huckster who comes in here and tries to sell you something. I'm going to talk with you.
Yeah. The other thing, James, I think is not just being novel, it's just being honest. Everyone, there's so much spinning that goes
That's
on.
novel.
Yeah, I guess I think if there was a quote from this podcast, honesty is novel. And this is one of my pet peeves is people don't give you enough feedback because some people think they're right or some people, believe in what they're saying, but they're truly wrong. And nobody will tell you that. It seems like there's an epidemic of no feedback, no real feedback. And I think that does everyone a disservice. It doesn't up-level the conversation. It's like we're talking about politics. Everybody wants a good story, but nobody wants to know what is. And I would prefer to talk about what is because I know everyone knows that rather than just spin a good story.
If you take the time to be honest with people, it's a tough conversation, right? If they take the time to be honest with you, it's a tough conversation. But I think that is the truest sign that they care about you, actually, that they're willing to say something and call you on your BS if it is BS, or just have the dialogue and the exchange back and forth. All right. So we've covered, I think, a ton of ground, Kostas. We like to make sure that we give our guests the chance to say anything they had in mind to say before we finish. Something that you want to make sure we get across, areas we should touch on that we haven't touched on.
First of all, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on this. I didn't know what to expect, and it was easier than I thought, and great. The second thing is, I think you started by saying I've been successful, and I think I have to qualify that. There are a lot of people that are a lot more successful than I have been, even that were in the same company at the same time. Success is the way you measure it, and it's a very individual thing. And so people get hung up on the money or the title or the duration of their employment at some place, or they're bragging about a certain thing. But I think each of us have to define our own success. And we have to be clear about that, because it will drive a lot of the decisions we make in whether we're wrong or not, and whether we're willing to get out of the way of our consequences. But I think success is something that is very individual. I just want to say thanks. And I appreciated the time with both of you.
Well, thank you.
I think listeners and watchers are going to find it fascinating, Kostas. We touched on so many things that really give one food for proper thought. And that's great, right? If we can give people something to think about, that's also novel in many settings. And we're happy. It was a great conversation. So thanks for that.
Thank you both.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.